Listen to this episode if you want a masterclass on branding, on creative, and what's actually working from the branding perspective in 2025, moving into 2026. Today, I am met with Briana, but you can call her Bri. She is a Midwest native with a California style and a lifelong love for design. After she landed what she thought was her dream job straight out of college, she quickly realized that the corporate world wasn't for her, and that's when she decided to pursue her passion and build the business of her dreams, Brighten Made. She's the owner of a creative studio. She's incredible. Her designs are insane. Every time I see them, I love them. Briana, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
In today's world, branding is key. We know that, you and I both, I'm sure.
Yes.
It is one of the most important pieces of your brand. What do you feel like makes a good brand in today's saturated world?
Yeah, I think the problem with a lot of brands today is I feel like everyone is just trying to copy each other. They're trying to play it safe. And I think to me, what makes a good brand is a brand that actually stands for something, a brand that is memorable and leans into storytelling. That's something that I try to push a lot of our clients towards all the time is you don't have to look like your competitors. We don't want to look like your competitors.
No.
We don't want to look like what other people are doing. And I think as entrepreneurs, it's so easy to get caught up in the comparison game and feeling like your brand has to look like someone else's. But the beauty of branding and what makes a strong brand is the brands that are doing something different and are not afraid to stand out or be bold or disrupt the industry that they're in.
Yeah, I see that a lot where people come to me and they're saying, hey, this is my inspiration. I would love to look like this brand. And then I go and look at their website and it is a carbon copy of this other brand. And we don't actually want that because it just puts you at the same light as them. And why wouldn't they choose this other brand that already has the authority and already has the market share if they look the exact same?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think too, you're always going to be second best to whoever or whatever you're copying. So even if you try to emulate something, it's never going to come across as strongly as the original idea. And so even then it's you're choosing to be second best. Might as well just, do your own thing and stay in your own
carve
lane.
your own path. How do you really feel like people can go about, if they are starting something brand new or they have a brand that they've kind of DIY, they don't really love it. How do you really feel like people can go about identifying a vision, an aesthetic, a vibe that they really feel like is going to separate them?
Yeah. So for one, I think it's really hard to brand something if you still don't know what you're doing. So if you're in the very early stages of your business or you're I'm just throwing spaghetti at the wall, trying to see what sticks, and I don't know, what my niche is or what thing I want to be known for or whatever that might be, that's okay. DIY branding is totally fine because there isn't really a big point into investing in branding if you are still trying to figure that out. Yeah. Once you do have a really solid understanding of okay, this is what I want to go haywire on, that's when we can really lean into the storytelling aspect and thinking about the experience and the feeling that you want your audience to encounter when they, come across your brand. So it's so much more than just I sell shoes. It's how do those shoes make people feel? And how could we potentially have that incorporated into the visual identity, if that makes sense?
Yeah, 100%. And people come to me very often with a couple colors, a font, a logo that they made and think that's kind of their brand. And when I start to dive into kind of the minutia of what a brand really is, I'm okay, what other products do we feel like are at the same point as you? What is this feeling? I feel like it's kind of mind-blowing to some people when they're first getting into business. So I didn't even think about my background has something to do with my brand and my videos that every little piece really adds to or subtracts from.
Totally.
Yeah. How do you create a feeling? I don't think that's something we try to do in too many times. I always like to say it's kind of similar to building a party. If you have a themed party, you're creating decorations and you're creating music that you're playing there, the right food, the right drinks, whatever that might be. How do you really translate that into a brand that has feeling and story?
I think so many small business owners often get hung up on the logo, right? The logo. It needs to feel a certain way, look a certain way. But at the end of the day, if you just have a logo that you're slapping on everything, that's not creating a feeling, No. You were saying, even the background of your videos can help tell that story and create that feeling. And so I think branding goes so much deeper than the logo. Yes, that is one piece of the puzzle or one piece of the party. Maybe it's the tablescape, but it's not, the whole picture. Yeah. And so thinking of ways where you can utilize color, illustration, pattern, texture, other visual components, photography, and make it really consistent across the board. So if I were to go to your Instagram, for example, am I getting a totally different feel than when I go to your website to when I receive your packaging in the mail? You know, how can that be a bit more cohesive and streamlined? And are you just pulling things like random things you find online and calling it part of your brand? Or is it actually strategic and intentionally like being used and created for your brand, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Is it like native? Is it organic to you? Or is it just kind of regurgitated from everything else that people are seeing?
Yes. Or is it like I needed to create a, social media post about my, sale. And so I go into Canva, I find a template and I just use that. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so that's where you actually create a lot of brand confusion with your audience because they're like seeing random fonts and colors from you all the time. So there's nothing memorable about that because if you're changing it constantly, it's very confusing to have a visual recognition. Whereas when you're super consistent, while that might feel boring to you, it's not to your audience. And so that's another area where I think a lot of business owners go wrong is they get bored with their own branding because they're the ones in their business all the time. And they think they need to reinvent the wheel every time they create an announcement or social content or literally anything. And it's like, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Use the tools that are in your toolkit. It's not about being boring. It's about being memorable and consistent. And you have to be repetitive. Like how many times do you have to share your message with someone before they remember what you were even saying, right?
For sure.
So branding is the same way.
Yeah, I totally see that because we're putting 100% focus on our own business, whereas our people on social media are giving us 4% of their focus a day maximum. Like it is when they're on the toilet or they're stopped at a stop sign or, they're sitting on the couch with their kids. There's such little actual attention on our brand. We're just trying to keep things consistent enough that when they see that lime green and pink color, they think of this certain brand. When they see these elements in the vibe, I totally can see that. So what I'm hearing from you is it's a lot less of reinventing the wheel. It's more cohesion. As long as from top to bottom of that customer journey, they feel a similar way, they see similar visuals, that is really what matters.
Yes, exactly. And I think across platform, because you might be killing it on your website and then your Instagram's another story. Or, your packaging might be amazing, but then what it looks like to shop online feels totally different. And so we just want to make sure that that's another way you can also really build trust with your customer is by having that cohesion from each step in the process in the customer journey.
Yeah, this might seem like a totally crazy question, but I know somebody out there has it. How do you feel is the best way to actually stay consistent with it? So I think some people are like, it is a totally different medium on emails versus Instagram. And now that everything should be kind of less curated, how do we actually stay consistent from top to bottom? And what are some kind of tangible strategies there that you feel is really important?
I think it first starts with nailing your brand. So if you DIY'd your brand, you're not going to have assets to pull from. You are going to be reinventing the wheel because you have nothing to work with. I recommend, when you get to a point in your business where you're ready to work with a designer who can then help guide you on those different things. And in the branding process, you should have a solid outline of like, here are the fonts that you should be using. Here's the right letter spacing. Here is like the size hierarchy, and taking that and then applying it to things like social media, things like your website. We're not trying to overcomplicate the process. I want, our clients to feel super confident with using the tools that are in their toolkit, but it's really hard to do that if it's not something that you are like, familiar with in terms of branding.
Or if you have like clarity on it in general. Like I think a lot of people are probably like, what do you mean letter spacing? Like I just kind of mess around with this. Like as long as you have, we letter space this amount. This is our normal font. We normally italicize it. We do these things. You really just have to create the parameters, and then it's easier for you to stick to it.
Exactly.
How far do you really think somebody can go with a DIY creative?
I mean, it really just varies person to person. Some people have a good eye for design, just like, if you were to ask someone if they could design their own house. Some people are really just talented and have an eye for what furniture goes together and, how you can create an experience. Other people, that's like something they don't want to touch with a 10-foot pole. So it's hard to say because I think it really varies from individuals. But ultimately, I think that in terms of DIYing, like, if you are still in the very early stages of your business where you're still figuring it out, like that's still totally okay. It's okay if it's going to be messy for a little bit. But I think once you get to a point where you want to, up level the overall like experience and make your brand more noticeable online, that's when I think, working with a designer could be really beneficial.
Yeah, a word that I keep hearing you say is noticeable or like seen. And I really feel like that is what your branding really does. People put an overemphasis on product. It's like, this is what I'm selling. I'm selling this product. I'm selling this product. But actually, in the product space, especially, like you're selling the brand at the end of the day. The thing that is actually your visibility, your magnetism, attracting the aligned people really is your brand. It's like that top of funnel. What do you feel like if people have a disjointed brand or kind of a lackluster brand, what are the results or lack thereof results that they would see? Like, what is the evidence of a brand that could kind of use a refresh?
Yeah. So I think, one, you're going to obviously lose out on sales, especially if your website is like super chaotic. It's not intuitive. It's not conversion driven. There's so much there that you could be missing out on. And then I also think too, it just leads to audience confusion. So again, you're not going to be memorable because it's inconsistent and chaotic. And so they can't associate you with a certain color or a certain feeling or a certain font. Oftentimes people will say to me like, oh, I saw this and I immediately thought of you. And that is what you want people to say about your brand. You want to stay top of mind because they're not always going to be seeing your social media content. Most likely not with the algorithm these days. And so you have to find ways to carve out that consistency so that you can be recognized, in other places when they're just doing their everyday, ordinary things.
Yeah, I always say that too, is people should be able to go throughout their everyday life and be like, oh, that's something sweet that Briana does. Like, this is, that's something that reminds me of her. And there should be little elements in your brand, even if it's a side of your personal brand or it is part of your actual professional brand, that people say, oh, like there has to be repetition enough where they see that and they think of you. And I have people in my community all the time. They're like, oh, I was shopping and I saw this and I thought of you. I knew you would hate that. Like I knew you would hate this packaging or I knew you would hate this style of what they're doing because you can put your stake in the ground on certain things. You have enough repetition on some of these pieces.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So what I see a lot is trendy brands. And this is something I would love to talk to you about is trendy versus kind of timeless brands. I've seen this in the last couple of years that there are trends to brands. Like brands for a long time wanted to be very minimal, very simplistic. I feel like a lot of brands are kind of coming to market now with like really googly fonts and fun, bright colors. And they do ebb and flow. What is your take on, should I make my brand attracted to the current trends in the industry, or should I try to make it timeless of something that is really, an extension of me?
I think it depends on the brand and the business and what you're selling and who your target audience is. Like, I think there's lots of variables there that you have to think through. But I would also argue that, yes, because something might be currently trendy, there's also maybe a timelessness to it. Like, I remember when arches were super popular and they still are. But if you think about it, it's like going back to Roman architecture, there's arches everywhere. And so it's not like it's this new thing that hasn't been around. It's more so just the way that it's like being used, in that time. So I think, trends can be beneficial for potentially speaking to a certain type of audience that you're wanting to attract and to just have like a really vibey, fun experience that feels like it's up to date with the times. I don't think that a classic brand is necessarily for everyone. Like if you're selling a product that is very specific to 2025, 2026, like not something that, is necessarily like a classic item, then I think leaning into trends is okay. We don't want to, we don't want it to be this copy and paste brand where it feels so similar to what else has already been out there. But I think it's okay to pick and pull different pieces of trends and run with things that you feel like are in alignment with your brand and things that aren't. And I think branding too is just like, it's an equation, right? Rarely is it ever like 100% classic. It's usually like a mix of different things. It's usually maybe a little bit timeless, but maybe a little bit, fun and playful and bold and colorful. And so you have to find a way to really mix in those different, feelings in order to create a brand that is unique to you and not just simply following a trend or simply just being classic because it's, quote unquote classic.
Yeah, I like that. I think again, it's that comparison as they see all of these people do it. They see this brand having good success. So they feel like they have to do that as well, where we're almost better off with our branding of like putting our blinders on and saying, what do I actually think would be really cool for me? What do I actually think is something that I really love, the style that I feel like I could stay consistent with, and moving forward without understanding of what it's good to see what everybody else is doing to kind of put your stake in a totally different area than everybody else. But it can't be within comparison of other people in your industry.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think keeping your blinders on is like one of the best things you can do for your brand and for your business, because if you are always searching for something else, you're never going to be fully satisfied. Yeah. And I think it's really hard to market something that you don't feel like super confident in. And so my advice would be to just like, don't even pay attention to what other people are doing and do what represents your goals, your audience. Like, think of the things that are true to your business and your experience and build a brand off of that rather than like paying too much attention to what else is out there.
Totally. Do you feel like you can evolve your brand over time? Or do you feel like it should be something that like we set, and if we want to change it, we're fully rebranding and we're launching something new, something along those lines?
Both. So I think it can evolve, but you have to be really careful about how you're evolving it, because I see a lot of business owners just evolve it because they're bored or because this new color is now trendy and now they want it in their branding. And it's like,
now butter yellow is everywhere.
Exactly. Or, they see something else they like and they're like, I'm going to start using this in my branding. And then they're trying to piece things together. And it's this sort of like hodgepodge of branding, because you're like mixing old with new. And I'm never a fan of that. Like I think everything you're doing should be strategic. And so with that, I mean, I think it's okay to evolve, but I say that with so much caution and so much hesitation, because unless it makes so much sense, do not do it. And I think, again, it depends on, what the situation is. Let's say you are expanding your product line and you're known for this certain color that your main product is, and you want to create another color that is associated with this new product. That makes sense as to why you would introduce maybe a new color in your color palette if there isn't one that's fitting. So I think as long as you're going about it in a very strategic and mindful way, it's okay to evolve the brand. But if you are starting to make big shifts, like big font changes or a logo change, just rebrand the whole thing, because again, it's like a puzzle piece. If you remove one of those pieces and then you start to like try to design around it, it just becomes so messy and complicated. And I think you're just better off starting from scratch, or at least evaluating like, okay, what's working in the current brand? What's not working? Why do I want to change it? And then kind of going from there.
Yeah, I can totally see that. Do you feel like it's something when people do rebrand that they have to kind of relaunch every time that they do it? Or do you think if they make a big transition, because I know there's a lot of people listening right now being like, I know my brand is not up to sniff. I know that I'm kind of acting as this, I'm kind of winging it. I'm DIYing it. I'm using Canva templates for everything. I'm just trying to get by, but they know they might want to start taking some steps to making it a little bit more professional. Do you feel like they should say, hey guys, there's a lot of changes around here. We're going to rebrand. This is what we're doing, once it's kind of finished? Or do you think that at that point where they're doing things, they can kind of evolve it to look something different?
I think it depends on the type of business. And if they're rebranding for like the third time this year, maybe keep it quiet. But let's say it's a big shift, and let's say they haven't changed their branding in 5 or 10 years or whatever it might be. That might be really fun for the audience to come along with that journey and like kind of sharing the history behind it. I've seen business owners do it both ways. Some of our clients will quietly launch and others will make it a big thing. And so I think it really just depends on like one, how much behind the scenes do you show in your business? Does it make sense? Is this something that your audience would want to see? If your brand doesn't really have that personal component or that behind the scenes component, maybe it's not necessary to do this big grand reveal. If it is something that is a part of your brand and you want it to be, a fun storytelling piece, I always think like there's so much fun and opportunity to bring the audience alongside of you. But if it doesn't make sense for your business, then maybe not. But however, otherwise, like I don't think there's any harm in sharing unless you are, like I said, rebranding for the third time in a matter
Yeah.
of a
Maybe
couple
we
of
want
years
to
or
think
something.
about that. Yeah. You're so right with like the shiny object syndrome is as entrepreneurs, we all love new and we love dopamine, but it's easy to get, oh, let me just rebrand. That's going to be the catalyst of everything for me for the 6th time this year. It's what's going to finally, but at a certain point that might not actually be strategic. Hey, I'm jumping in here for 30 quick seconds for those of you who are loving the podcast but wish we could dive deeper into every episode topic together. I have actually started a completely free podcast community called the Small Business Cafe for exactly this purpose. Inside this community, we dive deeper into every podcast episode, provide bonus resources, and actually host completely free monthly coaching calls with me. So you can get your questions answered. Plus, you get to submit your questions for our Friday coaching session episodes and connect with other founders too. If you have been loving being a part of this podcast and want to connect with other brand founders, plus get extra support from me, click the link in the show notes below to join. If there's somebody sitting out there saying, okay, I know my branding isn't great. I've been kind of just DIYing it, but I want to make it more professional. What do you feel like the first couple of steps are for them to start identifying what this like aesthetic even looks like?
Yeah. So I think first, like write down your goals. What are your future brand goals? And talk about like what is working with your current brand and what's frustrating you. So is it the lack of elements? Is it the lack of like professionalism or you just don't like the way it looks? And then thinking about like, okay, my goal next year is to be making this much in revenue. How can branding help get me there in a way that like positions it maybe at a more elevated way? And so you'll start to find answers to your own questions on like, if I want the brand to feel more this, then I need an aesthetic that feels like this. And so getting crystal clear on those like 3 and 5 year goals, I think is really big. And also to just like writing down like the heart behind your business and like, you know, why you do what you do and getting like really crystal clear on that. And then also looking at your target audience. So, you know, going into your Shopify dashboard or whatever it might be and seeing, you know, who are some of your loyal repeat customers and how can we maybe attract more of those? Or maybe you're trying to tap into a new market and you want to attract more Gen Z buyers or something like that. Then maybe thinking about how could the brand evolve to attract them as well. And so I feel like instead of just diving into, I like this and I like that, think about it more from a very strategic point of view of like what's going to actually, you know, target the right people and drive profits in my business. And so I think a lot of times business owners just go into the branding process as like thinking of their own personal style and aesthetic, which I get it. Like we're all creative individuals. That's why we run businesses. Yeah. But also balancing that with strategy and thinking about long-term visions and goals and making sure that like what you're designing today will set you up for success 5 years from now. Yeah. And what your ideal customer is actually going to be drawn to naturally. Yes.
That's a good distinction because I do think a lot of people are like, wow, I like bright and airy and colorful. And so they just go with what they have, which is okay to some regard, but it does have to at least matter to your ideal customer too.
Yeah, totally. And just finding that balance. Like if your brand is a personal brand where it's very much representative of you, like, okay, yes, you might have a little bit more say in what the visuals look like because it needs to feel like you if you're the face of the brand.
Yeah.
But also it has to speak to the right audience too. So it's this balance of like, is it attracting the people that you want or is it just simply based on your own personal style?
Yeah, that's really big. I think branding is one of those things that is actually such a really deep world that people don't understand the actual wide net that a brand really is that they really see it as just an aesthetic with a couple of colors and a logo that they can kind of slap on everything. Whereas when you really dive into branding, it's the accessories in your photos. It's, you know, the vibe that people feel. It's your website tone in your messaging. It's so much more than just a couple of photos and a logo where you are creating a brand that is super dynamic. It has a lot of different elements to it. Like I love your drawings, your caricatures, all of those things that you're providing your audience or that your clients. How do you decide on some of those pieces? Are they all strategic or some of them just like, okay, we want to have an 80s groovy style brand. What are some elements that we can add into that and kind of finding it from there?
Yeah. So I would say everything is strategic. It's just a matter of like what is needed for the brand. So sometimes people will come to us and it's like, we make everything by hand and we have a really hard time explaining that to our customers. And we want to show that we are sustainable or that we use recyclable materials or whatever that might be. And so it's coming up with an illustration style and also illustrative elements that could represent those different things that they're trying to communicate. And maybe too, like in their current branding, they just have that logo. And so they don't have other assets to work with to be able to kind of showcase different product benefits or things like that. And so illustration and different graphics are a really great way to visually communicate with your audience the benefits of your product. And I think a lot of times, we just are relying on copy. People aren't reading novels. They don't want to read novels. And so if you can give them quick visual cues, their brain is going to process that so much faster than any sort of word. And I also like to think of illustration as a really cool opportunity to create that feeling and that vibe that you were kind of talking about. So yes, it can be maybe a little bit more literal in a sense where it's like, we need an illustration to represent that it was made in America. Yeah. Or we need an illustration that just tells the story of this really fun retro vibe of the brand. And so it's definitely a balancing act of like, I don't ever like to go so literal with our illustrations where it feels just generic, like it doesn't tell that story, but also too, using it to our advantage in places where it's like, we need to visually represent these different benefits or whatever it might be. An illustration can be a great way to do that.
Yeah, I like that what you're saying here is that you're actually using elements of the brand to tell the story deeper. Because I think when we say you need to storytell, people do think it's just writing in the caption, this is what my story is, this is why I started my brand, things like that. But every touch point is building on top of your story. Everything you're doing is either adding to or kind of subtracting from that overall story that your brand gives, whether that's the mission or the value, what your actual overall purpose is. I think that is a really important distinction there. Something I speak about a lot is the art versus the science in business. Business is a really strong balance of creative and strategy, art, science, tangible versus emotional. And many of us lead with creative. 90% of people are visual. The emotion behind it, many people buy from emotion and then we justify on logic, but many people lead with the tangible side of branding. They lead with, we're handmade in America, and it's just saying it, thinking that it's enough, instead of having some of this more creative flow and this art versus the science. And what I'm seeing even from you, from the creative side, is you are creating art that also has that science and that strategy behind it.
Yes, exactly. And it goes back to that feeling and that memorable, noticeable brand, right? Yeah. So if you're wanting to communicate something being handmade in America, how can we utilize illustrations? Maybe it's the style. Maybe we do it in a way that looks more hand-drawn so that it signifies that it was handmade. There's lots of ways where you can be really thoughtful about the art and the creativity behind it. And I think too, depending on their audience, like women are very emotional buyers. And so, leaning into that experience, I think could be really, really helpful for the business.
Absolutely. So, Briana, how do people get started working with somebody like you? What does that process really look like? Because I know there's a lot of people out there that say, I am not a creative. I don't know how to design. I don't know how to make any of this myself. What does the process really look like of working with somebody that is kind of doing their creative for them?
Yeah. So first, I want to mention that a lot of designers usually book out months in advance. I think so often business owners are in this like hurry to get things done. They're like, I needed a new logo yesterday. Yes. A strong rebrand takes time. It also takes planning. And so I do this for a living. And even I was very naive when we rebranded my business this year on like how soon I wanted to launch it, because it's just not realistic. And so my first thing I would say is start your research sooner rather than later, depending on if you have a specific date in mind. Also, don't let that date of that new product or whatever it is that you're launching feel like that's the thing that's the driving force, because if we think about branding for something that you're going to have for years to come, it's not a process that you want to cut corners on. And I think there's so many times where people are like, nope, like I'm launching this product by this date, and so I have to have branding before this date. And then guess what? Lo and behold, the manufacturer slows things down or they run into some sort of delay. And then it's like, okay, so we rushed that for what reason? So I think planning is going to be your best friend. And then the second thing is that, looking for designers that align with the style or the feeling that you're potentially wanting your brand to have, but also going into it with a very like open, point of view, depending on, I guess, how much of a hand you want to have in the branding process. And then from there, like I would just say, inquire with a lot of designers and get a feel for budget and style and deliverables and just the full experience. And so for us, we always recommend to inquire on our website, and then we'll send over like a pricing guide that kind of gives outlined on terms of like branding and messaging, website, Shopify, stuff like that. I have, baseline pricing for all of that. And then from there, if they were like, okay, every project is unique. And so maybe, yes, they want to do branding, but then they also want to do a landing page because their, Shopify site isn't quite ready to do the full thing. That's also something that we can give a quote on. And also to just like making sure that we're a great fit with each other. So I always talk to every single person before booking them and working with them. I want to make sure that it's a great fit on both sides. And then really from there, I mean, the designer should be guiding you throughout the whole process. And so for us, we have like very detailed project timelines. So clients are never sitting there wondering like, am I ever going to look? Yeah. What's happening? Are you going to send my logo or am I just going to sit here forever? So we have that all mapped out. And that's something that I really pride myself on because I know as creatives, I think sometimes designers can have a really hard time adhering to deadlines and adhering to that sort of experience. And that's something that I just feel so passionate about. And so something you would just want to be on the lookout for, whether, whoever's designing your brand. And then also too, thinking about like the end, deliverables. Are you just getting a logo? That's probably not going to help you. What all does it include? Are there multiple assets? And what does that whole like process look like?
Yeah. Do people have to come to you with their idea for an aesthetic to start? Or can they sit down and say, honestly, this is my product. I have no idea what we want to do. And you will help them with the brand strategy side?
Yes, I will help them. So in kind of the first step is the branding questionnaire. So after they've like booked and everything.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask them so many questions. And a lot of those questions, we've even gotten feedback from our clients are like, it actually gave me so much clarity, even answering my own questionnaire. Yeah, because it got me thinking of things that I wasn't thinking about. And so in that process, I feel like one, they will receive a lot of clarity, but two, we love bouncing ideas off of clients. I always want them to give me something, even if it's not what they are super confident in, but I also don't want to design something that they completely hate. So like, give me a little something, but other than that, like we can totally run with it. And if it's something that you're like, I feel so confident, whatever you want to do, whatever you think is best, I'm all game. But I also just want to make sure that they know exactly like what to expect and that there's not this like, I never want there to be this disappointment. And so that's why it can be helpful to have a little bit of a general idea. Again, it can be super, super general or even just knowing what you don't want. So I can take either.
Yeah, I think that's really important because even when I'm working with people, I'm saying, go get some creative done. Go talk to somebody that's really great on the branding, the creative side. A barrier there is that they don't even know what they want. So they feel like they're going to sit down and be like, I don't know. Like, I got no ideas. So like, you have to do it. But if you can sit down and really do that process with them, it doesn't have to be that barrier. And that's what you're there for, is you really are there to help people come up with what makes sense, what's strategic, what's creative, and what's going to be unique in the industry too.
Totally. Yes, that's exactly what we're here for. And in the brand strategy process, we'll outline all of our ideas. So, you know, let's say we're envisioning this sort of symbol or this sort of texture or whatever it might be. Like, you'll be able to see all of my brain dump of ideas before I do any actual design work. And that allows them to have a gut reaction on like, oh, yes, this is exactly what I was envisioning, or I'm not sure about that color or whatever it might be. But we're able to kind of go into the process being on the same page, like visually, because that's the thing. Like, someone might say they want a classic brand, but then I look at their inspiration and it's not that. Or they might say, you know, they need something that's really playful, but then their product is like doesn't make sense with that vibe. So I think it's okay to not necessarily know, but also don't get too hung up on like the words, because different words mean different things to different people. Yeah, it's more of a visual library that we want to be on the same page about, and visual inspiration that we can then take and use as our guiding force. Again, not to replicate, but just to kind of give us a little bit of guidance so that they know what to expect and we know what to execute.
Yeah, it's easier to look at examples and saying, okay, I like that, I don't like that, than it is to come up with something fully. When you're looking for somebody that's going to help you with creative, or when you're creating your branding, you make very bright, colorful, dynamic brands. But there's also some people that create very moody, kind of like different styles, as well as people that create very minimalistic, very neutral. Do you think you should pick a creative director based on the style that you want to come in, or like a creative studio like you that, okay, people are coming to when they know they want to have a bright brand? Or is it okay to come to you and say, hey, you know, I want a neutral brand, this is what I want? Or should you try to find, initially looking at people's portfolios almost and saying, okay, I like this style, if we can kind of, you know, make it our own? I've seen this happen in a couple of ways where people go to the wrong style of people.
Yeah. So I would argue that we actually design a wide range of brands. Like, yes, maybe we do have very fun colors on our website, but I've worked with moody brands. I've worked with very minimal brands. I've worked with very neutral brands. There's every single brand in my portfolio. That is not the case for every other designer out there. There are some designers who solely design in a very neutral color palette and have a very, very specific aesthetic. I pride myself on really trying to make brands be very memorable and unique while also still in my style, in a sense. Like, my overall aesthetic, I would say, has more of a hand-drawn feel to it, an artistic sort of anthropology kind of vibe. But that doesn't mean every single brand that we work on
has to be that way.
You know, all has to look the same. And in fact, I don't like designing the same brand over and over. I get so boring. Incredibly bored. Yeah. So as long as like they see other projects of mine and they're like, yes, like I totally like could
love
see her
the
running
style,
with this. Then that's great. If you look at a creative's work and you're like, I hate everything, then do not inquire with them, because that is not going to be a good
like
fit.
What they make. Yeah.
So I would just look at their range of their portfolio. And then another thing that you can do too is, like, let's say you have in your head that you're like, I really want a moody, dark brand. Mention that when you inquire with them and see if they have an example that they could share that aligns with that style. So I think just, you know, every creative and designer is a little bit different. Some are very, very niche down to their specific style, while others are maybe a little bit more open. So just making sure that, like, you know what you're signing up for in that process. Yeah.
Some are a little more flexible than others. And that's really great to know, because I've definitely had people go and they're like, okay, I wanted this brand, but this person didn't create the brand that they wanted. It was more of what their creative direction was. So it's good to see some have flexibility there. Briana, thank you so much for being here, sharing all of this. I know that you have some fun things coming in the new year. Where can people find you? What do you kind of want to leave people with here when they come to thinking about their brand?
Yeah, so you can find me at Brighten Made or brightenmade.com. And in terms of what's ahead, so we do have some really awesome branding kits coming up in the new year. So these are essentially like pre-made designs that you can then take, and it's an editable Canva template. So you can input all of your business information, but we did all the hard work for you. So we pulled colors, we pulled, you know, type pairings. This is what your headline font looks like. This is what your body copy font looks like. And you can take it and really customize it to make it unique to your business. And they're at a very, you know, small percentage of what it looks like to work with us on a more custom level. And so if that's something that you're like very early on in the business and you still want to have a put together brand, but you're not quite ready for that custom, you know, layer yet, then that's a really great solution. And then otherwise, in terms of what else is ahead, I'm having a baby in January, which is really exciting. And just really looking forward to 2026 and this new kind of era that I'll be entering into. I have a lot of like personal life updates. We're going to be moving houses and stuff like that. So I'm excited for all of those things on a more personal note, but also just really excited to create new awesome brands in 2026.
I love that. Everybody needs to follow your socials. You have such fun, even just looking at your portfolio of ideas, your designs. I love your like colors you've been loving. All of that is really great. So go follow her at Brighten Made. We'll put all of her links below. Thank you so much for being here. This was lovely.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, of course. If you found today's episode helpful and are looking for more tangible ways to grow your business, make sure you are subscribed to the show. If you want to dive deeper into this topic more, click the link in the show notes and join our completely free podcast community where we dive into every single podcast topic, as well as give some bonus support and free coaching calls. And finally, if you are interested in getting my eyes on your business to find your hidden opportunities to scale, apply to work with me one-on-one in the show notes or on our website. Remember, it's not enough to listen. Don't forget to implement too. I love ya. I'll see you in the next episode.